when you're talking to somebody, it's not about you. You can jump in. Of course, there's a part to play in a conversation, but mostly you want to listen to someone and really pick their brain, ask questions. It's just, conversations is having a conversational skill set is actually usable in all sorts of social settings.
All right, so welcome to the Speakeasy, a show on how the voice impacts life. I'm Albert Alicer. Today we'll be talking about how to be a podcaster. During this pandemic, you might be looking for ways to have a creative outlet, or you might be looking for ways to make money. Well, podcasting is definitely an option for that. Maybe like me, you've been thinking about doing it for a while, but you just don't know how. Well, today is the perfect day to learn because we are speaking to this guest. This guest is the host of the Across the Line podcast, a show dedicated to covering the local football scene. He's also a sports TV anchor for football, volleyball, and basketball, having worked with ABS-CBN Sports and TV5. He is also the team media officer of Kaya FC Iloilo, which is a local football club. He is also a writer and a social media manager, having previously worked with the Meralco Bolts and Loyola Meralco Sparks. He is also a wedding host for 8 years and counting. And when he's not doing any of those things, he teaches jiu-jitsu classes to kids and teens, which he started just last year. So I present to you guys the man, the myth, the legend, who I'd like to call one of two of the power couple in the Philippines, Mr. Jing Jamlang.
Oh man, what an intro! Huh? I've never had my profile read out like that. It makes me feel strangely a little uneasy to listen to all those things. But yeah, man, thank you for the intro. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, perfect. So that's all the time we have. Any final words?
Let's just wrap this up.
All right. Let's get down to it, basically. This is episode 2 of the Speakeasy show. It's really all about how the voice impacts life. And the viewers would maybe like to learn more about things of this nature. So today, it's all about podcasting. And I wanted to ask you the first question. What is podcasting for you?
I was first introduced to it maybe like just at the turn of the decade, maybe like 2011, 2012, something like that. I was looking for ways to delve into particular subject matter that was somewhat difficult to find online. And when podcasting started blowing up in the States, it was like a means for you to dive deep and get kind of nerdy about certain subject matter. I liked Radio Lab. I liked listening to Joe Rogan, who always had guests on board that were kind of very interesting in their specific fields, whether it be history, alternative history, or psychedelics for that matter, or MMA. So I always liked the idea of being able to listen to conversations of that nature. So I would say podcasting is sort of like an audio, mostly actually for me, it was an audio medium. These days it's a lot more visual as well, but an audio medium that you can take with you wherever you are, and whatever you're doing, it's something that you could keep in the background and use as a weapon for learning and for entertainment.
Okay. So you, at the turn of the century, but how did
Turn
this
of the decade.
turn of the decade? Okay.
Yeah.
How did this opportunity to host the Across the Line podcast come into play?
This was something that happened last year, actually. I'd been wanting to start a podcast of my own for a long time. I've been looking around and seeing how I might be able to do that. And all of a sudden, there was this podcast that popped up. It was named Across the Line. It was hosted by a former Philippine international footballer and Chris Greatwich, and a person that I've worked with in the past through Kaya. And they had another co-host. His name is Sadelf Tupas. He's a prominent sports writer here in the Philippines. And I was a fan of the show. You know, I love the medium in which they were able to explore their ideas, and they were able to talk with guests in a long form manner, which I think is very much lacking in mainstream media, where you can only talk for 10 minutes max, 8 minutes max, and then we're going to go to commercial, right? So get all your talking points in and then get out. That's sort of how TV works. And radio is similar. Let's get to a track. Let's get to a song, you know? And here it's just sitting down and talking. So I was able to listen to some of these stories from some footballers who are famous here in the Philippines, and it really made an emotional impact on me. So I messaged them. I told them, hey, man, I really like the show. And then a few episodes in, they invited me over to do a Azkal's Best 11 show. So I came on. I talked about my best 11, discussed, argued, and Chris Greatwich at the time, unbeknownst to me, was actually looking for a new co-host because Sadelf was getting a little too busy with his time and could not make it or could not commit to the podcast the way they had wanted initially. So a spot had opened up, and he told me that if I was interested, then I could come on board. And that was sort of, that's how I got on the show. And
Perfect.
It's been, I don't know, a few months since already.
Yeah. So talagang linapitan mo sila tapos kinausap mo, like, I mean, you knew some of the personalities already, but the person who was leading or who owned the podcast, did you know that person already?
One of the co-hosts, just Chris. I didn't know the people behind it. So the production company behind it, I wasn't familiar with, actually. So I got to know them once I got my first guesting, and I got to know them afterwards more with all the shows that we put together.
Yeah, cool. So what's the best thing about podcasting? What do you like the most about it?
I think it's the fluidity of the format, right? It could be an hour and a half. It could be 30 minutes. It could be 20 minutes, or it could be 2 hours. You're not beholden to a network. You're not beholden to airtime. You're not, those things, right? Even your language, you can speak in whichever way you want. There's no correct radio voice or TV professional voice that you're supposed to use, right? So it's a very casual, be yourself type format, which I feel like is difficult to find, you know, and it's really refreshing, especially in this modern age where everything is bite-sized and super clean, super edited. It gives you this natural sort of interaction with individuals. But then that's not the only style of podcast there is, right? There's also the ones that are very well produced, which I am also a fan of, you know? So it's the fluidity between both as well that I appreciate. You know, there's a dynamic that can be super clean and with sound effects and post-production, or it could just be a casual conversation that you tag along with. So it's all up to you. And it places the creator with a lot of power that you don't have to conform to a specific format.
So when you think of podcasting, who is your intended audience? Who's it for?
For me, it's the footballer community, right? So everybody who watches football in the Philippines, who is interested in sort of how things are going in and around Philippine football, then the former players as well, parents of kids who play football. So that's sort of the community that we've grown connected with. But now as well, we are kind of venturing towards not just the Philippines, but the region of Southeast Asia. So because of this current pandemic that's going on, and we've been confined to our own homes, there have been a lot of drawbacks, obviously, as we can't record in the studio, but we now have access to people who are abroad, who are also bored out of their minds at home and want something to do and want something to talk about. And we're able to reach out to places like Australia. We've been able to reach out to England, Taiwan recently, and now we're going to check in with a few friends from Singapore. So now it's it's an opportunity for us to grow our listenership in the Southeast Asian region as well.
How do you know that? Like, are there stats that you see online that you see the listeners coming from certain countries, things of that nature?
Yeah, so most of the platforms where the podcast is released, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, that will all have analytics as to where you're being downloaded, average time where people have been listening. I think they even have like a demographic of individuals in terms of like their age, gender, those things. So yeah, that's a beautiful thing as well about podcasting is you can get a very specific specific statistics as to who is listening, how long they're listening for, and a general background on those individuals as well.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's go into conducting interviews, or you as a host. I know you've been hosting for a long time, more than a decade, I think, and a lot I know goes into hosting. So, how do you, as a podcaster, conduct a show? What do you keep in mind when hosting a podcast?
So in our medium, in our format, it's very loose conversation. It's very like conversational, but a conversation is difficult to listen to if it's clunky, right? So what I like to do is we have an idea or an outline of things that we want to talk about, right? A person's background, maybe a particular issue that was controversial in the past. Maybe you want to hear thoughts on a particular topic. So we'll list down those particular outlines, and as co-hosts, we will speak about, okay, these are some things that we want to talk about for sure, right? How we get there, however, sometimes isn't a straight line, right? Sometimes because I want to keep it conversational, the intro is one of the most important things, right? What is the best question or set of questions or greetings that you can have that would put a person at ease and make them open up right off the bat, right? That means something, I don't want to make it okay, let's dive deep into something in your past right out of the gates, you know what I mean? So let's make it conversational and simple. How are you doing? What are you doing in the pandemic? How things are going over there? And then slowly try to find a route to take it back into the past, right? So therefore you have to really listen well, and you can find a strand from that conversation that you're having right now and see how you might be able to tie that into a thread back into the past, right? So and then we'll start going down the outline, but always it has to be, or what I found that is most engaging is that it has to be something that the interviewee said.
Okay.
Something that he said that you can latch onto and be like, hey, that's interesting that you say that, because back then, you know what I was thinking, blah, blah, blah. And then let's push you back into that direction. And then we're now talking about the past, right? So if you find a strand that you could use to tie it into where you want to take the conversation, I think that is the cleanest, most easy to listen to style of conversation.
Okay, so let's dive deep into the past. What is your any deep-seated feelings? No. Actually, my next question is, what are the skills you need to successfully host a podcast?
I think first and foremost, you gotta be like a curious person, right? And you have to be genuinely interested in whoever you're speaking with. I think that's number one, because that will not only get you started, but it will sustain you for however long you're going to do it. And if you're going to be podcasting, one of the main things is consistency, right? People don't want to get invested in a podcast that is going to appear and disappear within the span of a few months, right? They want something that they can rely on for a long time. And that's why I'm a huge fan of the Joe Rogan Experience. They started off as a backroom, sort of like a couch conversation. but it's been around for more than 10 years. And now they have millions of subscribers, and they continue to churn out episode after episode after so many years. So now you can count on that, right? Same with like Radio Lab and Freakonomics and all of these other hardcore history. 10 years, easy. They keep doing it. Why? Because they're interested in what they're talking about, and they're genuinely curious about the subject matter that they're discussing. So for me, I'll never run out of interest in football. That's why I'm confident that as long as we continue to stick together and have interesting guests, that we'll just continue to churn out content. In fact, sometimes it's just myself and the co-host, and we can bang out 30 minutes to an hour easily, because it's just sort of where my headspace is at. And then when you're talking to somebody, it's not about you. You know, you can jump in. Of course, there's a part to play in a conversation, but mostly you want to listen to someone and really pick their brain, ask questions. It's just, you know, conversations is having a conversational skill set is actually usable in all sorts of social settings. You know, you see people who speak over other people on a regular basis, or who are nervous when it comes to meeting new individuals. But really, it's just all about being interested, being curious about another person. And you'll find that another person will want to share a lot of things about themselves. So that's what I find as number one.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because actually, ako rin before, when I was learning to be a reporter, we had a speaker named Cito Beltran. I don't know if you're familiar with the guy.
Sounds familiar, yeah.
But he's like this master interviewer, I guess is what you call him. And he talks about curiosity as well, about being genuinely interested in a topic. So I guess that answers one of my other questions, is how you do not run out of content. But I don't think it's natural for everyone to have that feeling of being able to churn out content, as you said. So it might be an awkward question to ask you, but what for you is I don't know if you have like a style or like a method to it in terms of how you do not run out of content. How do you keep on coming out with content, and how do you not run out of it, basically?
I guess I'm lucky in that it's been like a decade that I've been embedded in the Philippine game. Before it exploded, I was already kind of a fan, you know. I was always looking forward to things that nobody else was interested in. So it helps to have a real deep interest in whatever it is that you're going to get into, right? I mean, if it's going to be a podcast on history, then I hope you're a history buff, and it's something that is an unlimited well for you, right? If you're interested in speaking about the power of the voice, then I hope that you have the interest in that subject specifically, and the many different ways that the voice can be utilized, which is in my mind a fascinating subject. You know, it's something that I ponder actually on a regular basis, that my voice is responsible for a lot of my work, essentially. You know, speaking is everything for me. Words in general are everything for me. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting individuals there, but it goes back to curiosity. It goes back to your interest. How really interested are you in this subject? Because if you are, you'll find that it's an unlimited hole, right? It's like for me, I'm new to jiu-jitsu in a sense that I'm only a blue belt. I'm nowhere near being a black belt, but I've been exposed to how deep a simple martial art, or you know, with a series of moves, can get extremely complicated and simple at the same time. It's simple in a way that in order to grasp it, you have to simplify it. But man, if you want to go down a wormhole, you can spend an entire lifetimes. People are going through trying to figure out how to master this game. You know what I mean? So I'm similarly interested in things like poker and football, obviously. So I don't know. If you find something that you're very interested in, you know the feeling.
Yeah. Thinking about that, I actually in my first episode, I was talking about how I'm a white belt in this VO industry.
Mm,
So it kind of coincides with what you're talking about, how you can be a beginner at something, but if you're genuinely interested and if you're genuinely curious about a certain topic, then a podcast can really flourish for you. And
for sure.
before I forget, I was actually you talking about how important words are. Um, I'm actually reading this book. It's called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, and in that book he said, um, words are the verbal embodiment of power. So it's just fascinating how people really put a lot of importance and emphasis on what words can do. And words are
Mm,
basically conveyed verbally or written, but a lot of it is like you can think about speeches of Martin Luther King, Barack Obama, things of that nature, and how the voice is really something important. Like even YouTubers say it's 50% of the video. So
mm,
just talking about how important the voice is.
yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah. So going back to, or I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the specifics, I guess, of a podcast. And like, how many people are working on the show? And what are their functions?
There's four of us, so two co-hosts, right? We're responsible for getting guests, obviously running the show in terms of the actual product, talking to the guests, getting the information and all of that out there. And then there are two production staff that are on board, right? So one of them is responsible for essentially capturing the conversation, cutting that conversation, adding a little bit of production value to it. In our usual setup, we have about 3 cameras that are used and multiple mics. So he's responsible for setting that up as well, and for choosing which cameras to cut to. That's his job, right?
So
They'll cut it,
kind of have like a
make it.
director.
Yes, yes, yes. The main guy, main producer of the show, right? He would also be responsible for um, the little intro in the beginning.
Okay.
So normally, like in a podcast, just to give the listeners a taste of something, he'll add a little teaser in the beginning. So that stuff he does, a cool music with the intro, and then he puts it up on YouTube and the library, the audio library where it can be found, which would then be fed into Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So all of that is him. You know, that's why my job is so much better. Just walk in, talk, get out.
Yeah. So just host, basically specializing your role.
Hmm.
Okay. In terms of like the requirements of what goes into an episode, of course, you have the interview proper. But aside from that, I just wanted to run these down. You have the picture of the thumbnail at the start. You have
Mhm.
your CV or your resume of the interviewee. You have your video files and pictures for support of the interview. And then you have your questions, and then of course you ask their links to business and social media accounts.
Yep.
Did I miss anything?
No, that seems to be pretty thorough. Actually, some people won't even go that far. A good thumbnail though is important, especially for YouTube. For people, and if you're gonna, I mean, social media is such a big thing for podcasting as
Yeah.
well. So that's a big part of it. In order to be able to get the word out there, it's got to be visually stimulating. The content might be great, but you got to give me a reason to click it, right? Um, the profile doesn't have to be complete in that, just the most engaging aspects or the ones that are relevant to the conversation. And a lot of it is also going to be included in the show notes, right? Links and other relevant information, even things like subject matter that comes up. For example, if there's a subject matter that comes up and a specific book is referenced, then you can timestamp that in 21.03 of this conversation. A book is mentioned. Here's a link to that book or whatever, if you really want to be thorough with it. But yeah, pretty much that's it.
And in terms of equipment, what do you need to start out in? I know you mentioned about having mics and all, but that's like a perfect setup. But what about like if it was a basic setup, or right now where people are stuck at home, what do you need?
What we're doing right now, you need a phone or a laptop and earphones, ideally, just to make it so that it's um, a little bit cleaner and it takes out of the ambient noise. But that's it. I mean, you could even do it just on voice memos if you'd like, or sound recorder, whatever device app is on your phone. That should be good, you know, as long as it's not too noisy. If you can get a quiet room, that's it. That's all you need.
And we actually talked about this. Well, right now we're using Zoom, but you can also use Google Hangouts or Google Meet, I think is what it's called. And then you need, if you're gonna be using Zoom, there's already a recording function. But if you're using Google, there's this software called OBS, which you basically install. It's for screen recording purposes, right?
Yeah, it's free, which is a big deal, right? And you can use it to actually live stream as well. So if you want to do that live on YouTube, live on Facebook, then you can utilize OBS. It has the capability to capture your screen while at the same time being able to source the output audio. So not the input of your microphone, but everything, like the actual sound of the call, right? So I can take that and use that as part of the stream or part of the recording. So it's a very useful tool, and I think it's utilized pretty widely amongst a lot of people in production.
Okay. All right. So let's go into the show proper, or basically how you prepare for the show. Do you have like any mental exercises or physical even? Preparing your voice, maybe?
Maybe I should. Might help, but I don't personally, if I'm going to be honest. Mentally, I like to keep a clear mind, not as long as I don't have anything else bothering me. Short meditation might be good, 5 to 10 minutes just to kind of clear your head. Outside of that, it's just I'm fueled by the excitement and the enthusiasm to speak to somebody that will be of interest to me.
Okay. So in terms of managing guests, how do you choose which guest goes on the next episode, things of that nature?
So we do a weekly show, but we don't necessarily shoot weekly, right? So we can a lot of episodes so that we can continue to put them out on a consistent basis. So sometimes we'll be doing 2 to 3 episodes a week, the order of which we can decide later to release, right? So we just do the episodes. Let's just do as many episodes as we can. Who's of interest today? Who's of interest tomorrow? If there's a particular, right now, because there's nothing going on in the world of football, we don't care. Anyone, at any time. If you're free, let's do it. But if there are specific, say, issues that are ongoing in the world of football, then the person most relevant to that information, to that issue rather, would be the person that we'd like to get on as soon as possible, right? So like I said, we're canning these episodes as well. So if certain issues align better with a particular episode, maybe even if this episode or episode A was recorded before episode B, we might fast track and release episode B first if it's more pertinent to the climate right now, for example. So
Okay.
that's how we do it.
And then in terms of actually inviting um, guests, I know, well, you'd have your, what you call your circle of friends, but of course that
Right.
runs out after a while.
Hmm.
How do you get in touch with people that aren't necessarily someone you know, or someone who's maybe you want to invite someone from Europe or America? How do you go about that?
Um, you just reach out to them. Social media is so easy now, right? You'd be surprised. You can go on their Twitter, you can go on their Facebook, you can go on their Instagram, private message them, you can email them, right? Try as many different ways that you can get in contact with somebody. It might be difficult, it might be a long shot, but it's important that you take your shot, right? For me, quite recently, actually, I was able to reach out to a player of a team in Singapore. I've never met this guy. I've never spoken to him, but I did know the team manager for which he worked for. Um, I don't really know him that well, but I reached out to him on WhatsApp and asked him, got into a conversation with him, and then eventually was wound up asking him about whether he can put me in contact with that player. Spoke to that player, and now I'm going to be interviewing tomorrow. So just find ways, whatever way that you can reach out to somebody, do it. If this guy knows somebody that might know this guy, reach out to that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you pay the guests for
No,
their interview time? Okay.
no. Most of these people will just want to talk, you know.
Yeah.
So none of these guests are getting paid.
Awesome. It's just really the interest, I guess, to share an idea.
Yep.
Okay, so you're in the interview. You're doing the show. How do you? Let's talk about formulating questions. How do you weigh a good question from a bad question? What's the thought process in asking questions?
For me, there are a lot of good questions that are said in the wrong time. And I think it's more important that the timing is correct rather than whether the question is good or bad, right? If you're going to disrupt the flow of a conversation in an interview, I think that sucks because the listeners are like, come on, man, we're moving in this direction and you took a hard left and you did a U-turn somewhere to talk about something that we've talked about already or was mentioned earlier in the conversation. That's tough to listen to. So I like to think that, let's keep walking down this path and let's continue down this path. Like it's as if you were talking to somebody for real. When you're having a conversation with somebody, especially somebody who's not a very good friend, you're going to be very much conscious about boring this person, which means your stories have to be concise and they have to be entertaining or informative or whatever. You got to get to the point quick, right? But when you're asking questions also, you don't want to be asking stuff that is irrelevant to what we're currently talking about, right? So I think that's very important in creating um, the pathway for your questions. But also, you want to get as much information from this person as possible, right? So it goes back to the intention of the interview. Why is this person here? What do you want to learn from this person? Therefore, if you want to learn these things from them, have you asked the pertinent questions required to get that information from this person? If not, then you're not doing a good job as an interviewer, right? So you want to be able to, at the end of the interview, be like, man, I milked that for everything. I got everything I wanted and a little extra because I could not anticipate where he was going to go. So you want to be able to get to that spot at the end of the interview, I think.
Okay. So you mentioned one don't, which is taking a hard turn somewhere that segues into a totally different topic. What are the other things that interviewers should not be doing?
So this was a delicate one. Don't talk over your interviewee, right? Because you want to take the limelight of the interview, right? You want to be able to let the person get their thoughts across. But at the same time, There are interviewees that are ramblers, right? And also like to talk in circles or move in a direction that is meandering into a different place. So you don't talk over somebody, but you have to know to stop them as well. Now, this one comes with experience. You have to be able to be willing to get into a lot of different interviews to understand when it's a good time to stop that person from talking and get them back on track, right? And then, of course, there's the manner in which you do that, right? You can't just be abrupt and
And
rude.
that's all the time we have.
Yeah, right? You also have to be like, oh, I wanted to go back to that. There's something you said that was interesting that maybe we could, put a little bit more emphasis on, and, you sort of cut you off, blah, 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 things of that nature. And just to make it so that it's not, you don't want the audience wincing at a particular moment. That's what you want to avoid.
I want to ask this question. Have there been like awkward moments in your, like, it's just interesting for me. You can not answer it, but what's like the most awkward situation you've ever been in a hosting situation, whether it was maybe in a wedding or anchoring for a TV show? Like, what's your most awkward moment?
I'm going to go back to my radio days.
Okay.
And I was a little bit new and a little bit naive and a bit assumptive in who I was interviewing. So it was for a magazine, and some nice looking ladies had come over onto the radio show. And in the magazine, they were wearing like, skimpy outfits and stuff like this. And I had come over and said something stupid. Like they were wearing like an undersized shirt. You know how like
I got you.
like a super small shirt, and then some of like a girl's boob might be like hanging from the bottom of the shirt or something like that. And I made a comment about like oh, don't you think like maybe the shirt was maybe a couple sizes too short or something like that. And I was just expecting them to laugh or whatever, and I had gotten sort of like a not a good reaction from it. Like they were kind of offended by it. And then I thought, I'm just going to stick with my guns and do it again, or make another quip, And I learned two things there. It's like, don't assume a person's personality because of their willingness to show their body. You know what I mean? These people were actually turned out to be eloquent, smart, intelligent individuals who were making the most of an opportunity that was given to them. You know what I mean? So there's no need to assume anything. And also, like, don't make stupid jokes like that. You know what I mean? I mean, but at the same time, you gotta take chances. You can't be too rigid as well. Yeah. So
you gotta take risks.
You gotta take risks. That's for sure, right? And sometimes when you take risks, you're gonna fall flat on your face. And that was one of those moments. And unfortunately, it'll happen that it's live, and there's gonna be 1,000 people who are listening to you who would have winced at their radio. But hey man, it's not easy doing these things,
It's entertainment at the same time.
Exactly. And it sticks with you, and you learn from it, and you become a better interviewer down the road.
Okay, so you've got your worst practices. What are your best practices? Some maybe tips of the trade, tricks of the trade.
This one I'm constantly working on as well. I think it's preparation, right? There was a time where I used to delude myself into thinking I'm not going to prepare anything at all, just so that everything becomes natural. But what happens when you do that is that there are certain things that you fail to mention or forget to mention, or there are things that are left wanting after the interview that I don't like, that I've learned that should not be the case, right? There's a way to be prepared but natural in your delivery, and I think that's what everybody should aspire to. You cannot over prepare for something. You want to give somebody an opportunity to tell their story, and you're not going to be too assumptive of everything about them, you want to give them room to surprise you, but at the same time, you don't want to be, you don't want to leave everything too much to chance. You know what I mean? You want to get the meat of the interview. So you got to know this person, and you want to be able to skip over certain details that are common knowledge to a lot more people, right? Because it'll bore the large majority who are already familiar with the famous person's certain accomplishments, right? So you don't want to be that complete idiot who's like, oh, really? You did acting? You know what I mean? So you're an actor to Leonardo
So you're
DiCaprio or something like that.
left-handed.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So you want to be able to get a decent grasp of a person. And then from there, sort of like churn your curiosity into areas that maybe might be of interest to people who already have a cursory knowledge of this person, or maybe even a deeper knowledge of a particular individual.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so you've done the interview, and now I want to talk about parang, I think it's called post-production. So you've recorded the interview, everything's good. How do you actually, I know YouTube, you just upload the video, but how do you get into platforms like Spotify or Google's podcast app, things of that sort?
I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert in this, but from my light research into this, it's basically you have to have a website or a platform where you upload all of your episodes, right? It's like fm.library, or I think some people use SoundCloud, and from there you can utilize that as the like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and other podcast platforms will then just source it from your site.
Okay.
Right, so there's like an RSS feed or something like that. I can't say the lingo is accurate at this point, but they would be using that as a feed into the Spotify playlists and the Apple selection as well. There will be certain guidelines that you will need to be able to tick, and those will be made available on those platforms. It's an easy Google search away. What is necessary to get my podcast on Spotify or whatever, but from my understanding, you'll need to have some sort of account where you get everything in as your archive. And that's it.
Okay, cool. And talking about the finances part of the podcast, do you have like any idea on how much does it cost to run a podcast?
Well, I'd say it varies, right? I mean, if you're going to have a lot of technical equipment, then the cost of the equipment would be taken into account. Some of these areas where you upload your audio is not free. They will have a subscription based sort of package for you. So those would be some of the costs. Other than that, there aren't overhead costs that you need to take into account unless you're doing it in a studio, right? In which case ours is relatively free because our production crew or our production house is headed by a guy who works for a production company. So then he gets to utilize this studio when it's not being utilized for free, you know? And we have a rev share agreement with the production company so that half goes to the co-hosts, half goes to the production company for them and their marketing of the podcast, for their production and marketing of the podcast. All of these things are not set in stone, you know what I mean? Especially if you're producing your own podcast, utilizing the equipment that you already have available, then there aren't really that many costs that are entailed in doing that. So it depends on how professional you want it to be. You know, we're doing it right now over laptops and phones or whatever. Other people, they'll have a separate camera shooting them, separate mic, and making it a little bit more complicated. So those things will bring cost if you want the production level to be that high.
Okay. So that's for cost. Now, a lot of viewers would probably be more interested in the other aspect, which is how do you earn from it?
Mm,
So you
right.
mentioned rev sharing, but um, YouTube, you have ads once you hit a certain standard for them. But if you're going for other platforms, maybe how do you how does the revenue come in?
I think in the beginning, if you were just starting out, thinking about profiting from your podcast is in the soonest possible time is not your main priority. It shouldn't be your main driver, as it might take time to create money through podcasting, right? So there are different models in being able to create that revenue. One is through sponsorships. So, companies, once they know that you are generating a certain number of viewers or listeners per podcast, will want to jump on board. And generally how the pricing works is every 1,000 views, 1,000 listens, you will be paid a particular amount, say like 5,000 pesos, right? Um, you multiply that by how many viewers you can get per podcast, and that could be small or big, depending on how large your following is or how many sponsors you can bring on board. Second way that you can get paid for doing a podcast is um, I believe there was a donation-based um, model as well, right? If your viewers enjoy this kind of content and want more of it, then you encourage them to donate through platforms like Patreon or straight to your PayPal or straight to your Gcash or whatever is most convenient to you. So there's that, right? There's a donation based as well. Um, what else is there? Obviously, if in YouTube, yeah, once you get a particular followership, then you will get paid through YouTube plus whatever sponsors that you get on the side. So those are the main models. Other is, yeah, I saw somebody do it through a Kickstarter, even getting
Mm.
production costs paid for ahead of time. But yeah, I think the main goal is to get started and to develop a following, right? That's an interesting thing because it's free content, right? You're getting it off YouTube, you're getting it off your Spotify or your Apple Podcasts. These are free. And if you're charging per episode, which other people do as well, like a subscription-based podcast, it's tough, man. It's tough to be able to get people to do that because there are 100 to 1,000 to 1,000,000 other alternatives out there that are actually free and are done at a very, very high level. So how are you going to convince somebody to pay for your stuff? So that's a question you need to ask yourself. Um, your content has to be really, really good if you're going to walk down that path. So yeah, I mean, that's what you got to think about is developing a following is what you really want.
Did you go into workshops to learn to be a host?
That's, I guess I was one of the lucky ones, you know. I've always taken a liking to public speaking. I've sort of like always thrived in an environment where I needed to speak. I thought that I could do that well and it convey my ideas well. So when I got out of college and went into radio, initially I wasn't good enough, too nervous. And then when I did get into radio, that's kind of what opened me up to sportscasting. When they started looking for football anchors and analysts, I auditioned and was lucky enough to nail my first audition. So once I got my foot in the door there, it sort of allowed me to stay in that industry, even though my first live broadcast was an absolute nightmare. It was an absolute horror show. It was a tragedy of of television
Being
if you
too hard
watched
on
it, you
yourself,
know.
man. I'm
No, no,
sure
no, no, no,
people
no,
were.
no, 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 no. It was bad. It was bad. I wasn't aware of how a production worked of live sports. We didn't do any rundowns. They just expected me to go and be on it. You know what I mean? And it did not pan out that way. I got extremely nervous, and it was a disaster. But they kept me in the loop, in the rotation, and I started getting better after a couple years, or three years maybe in TV5. ABS was looking for new sports anchors, and I got exposed to them. There, I learned a little bit more about how some of the people that I looked up to did it, and sort of their work ethic, and some of the best practices that they elicited and utilized. And that's, you just kind of learn from your peers, watch other people, how they do it abroad, people that you'll tend to sort of like veer towards individuals that you enjoy, and just try to pick up the things that you can from them. But in terms of like professional training, I never got a chance to, but I am seeing a lot of my peers who have gone through like sportscasting workshops and newscasting workshops, and those are great. If you are interested, the reason why it's great is because not only are you picking up tools of the trade, but you're also being involved in a community. You're already getting your foot in the door in terms of the right people to meet, the right people to know, the people who might be interested in picking you up for a particular project are already in these communities. So yeah, I would highly recommend that.
Yeah. I think we all have our horror stories on our first time in front of the camera or in front of the mic. But what I liked remembering about those moments is how exhilarating it felt. I remembered my first auditions and how I psych myself up all day until that moment you go in front of the camera or in front of the mic. I mean, honestly speaking, even before this podcast, it's been a while since I broadcasted anything. It's like, oh, it's a little bit, that sensation of going live again. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, man, it's exhilarating. That's for sure. I used to enjoy watching reports. I was like, the only time I'm interested in the news, man. It's still, hey, maybe Albert will pop up, huh? Maybe he's got a live report somewhere. That's tough, man. That was tough, dude. It's
And then you
impressive
get
stuff that
texts.
you're able to do that.
You get texts from like Kenneth. Oh, sikat ka na.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions here. Thinking about podcasting. Well, you've obviously had a more rich career, more than just podcasting. But in terms of how podcasting has contributed to that, how would you say it's made an impact in your career?
For me, it's I think the art of the conversation. I go back to that a lot because I feel like it's been lacking in a lot of mainstream media. And it's a skill that you can bring outside of the booth or outside of the Zoom conference that you're going to be conducting your podcast from. When you sit down with somebody who is interesting, who is accomplished, who has done many things in their life where you want to learn from, you get those from conversations, and it's a simple conversations that I believe are overlooked. People say, I hate small talk. What is small talk? You know what I mean? Nobody is forcing you to talk about just random things that have already been placed as regular to talk about. No, like you should be engaged and figure out ways to get engaged with somebody in a manner that you walk away better or they walk away better. You know what I mean? That you walk away with something more than when you did when you first sat down. So I think podcasting, listening to podcasts and being involved in podcasts, both sort of kind of shines a light on that very skill. It's a very human skill that you should be able to sit down with somebody and learn from someone, and maybe exchange in an entertaining manner. So yeah, that's what I enjoy the most out of it, and that's what I take from it. And I bring it with me wherever I go. So when I meet a stranger or somebody, I'll be like, you know that guy? That guy is super interesting. You just be a random dude, or whatever. But once you start getting more experienced with probing and asking a person's interests and watching their eyes light up when you get to a subject matter that is of interest to them, then you start, developing this nice exchange. And yeah, it's one of the most not fascinating, but good feelings. I'm losing the word right now, but that feeling of contentment that you can get from having a good exchange with someone, it's special. I like it very much, and I yearn for it on a regular basis.
Awesome. And in terms of that, I guess I just wanted to get an idea. How important is the voice in all of that, in all that you do? How important is it to have a voice?
Man, it's more and more as I get older, and I learn to appreciate how important it is, take care of your voice as well. I think I'm learning that more now that I'm in my 30s, because when I was younger, it was more about abusing my throat, smoking cigarettes and drinking a lot and all of these things. And, it takes it takes a toll on your throat. And there's this thing that I listened to in the past. It's like, we're always taking out loans on our health that we can't cash down the road. It's gonna catch up to us, So we have to take care of it, because nothing is for free. We're paying for everything all the time. Whether it's a lack of sleep or not taking care of your voice in this case, we're gonna pay for it at some point, right? And if my career is gonna be rooted in my ability to speak, in my ability to convey words publicly, then I'm not making a good investment by abusing my throat and my voice, right? So the voice is central to hosting, to my ability to do podcasts, to speak and exchange. There are people who are good with words and they write them and they're able to express themselves better in that way. But me, I need to talk. I need to speak to myself even when I'm thinking. So, man, it's everything. It's been everything for me. Getting involved in voiceover work even. It's just so dynamic, and it really is able to express not only my thoughts but my emotions and my ideas. And being able to exchange with somebody, it's only possible with me through voice. I'm better that way. I'm not so much a fan of exchanging through text. There's so much of that nuance that gets lost in how somebody wants to convey a message. So I'm a big appreciator of the voice, and hopefully able to protect it for many years.
For a long time. Yeah. And maybe I can help with a few of the tips that I've learned in terms of taking care of the voice. Since
please,
I did mention I do want to get into voice acting more, or voice artistry. So they talk a lot about how you need to take care of the voice, and which I'll be sharing with you offline. With that, Jing, thank you so much for guesting on my second episode. You're guest number 1. So
awesome.
Eventually you'll have that plaque or something once I get my YouTube button.
Oh man, it's an honor to be the first guest on the Speakeasy, man. It's awesome to be here and to be able to talk to you about this. And I hope I'll be back on for like the 100th episode or whatever down the road, man.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that would be cool. For those who don't know, Jing and I would host or get into contests back in high school, and we'd win those things. It's just been a long time coming, man. So it's nice to do something with you again here.
Still one of my fondest memories, by the way. Those newscasting competitions, man. Still think about it until this day.
Awesome. With that, we end the show. This has been the Speakeasy. Thank you so much for joining us. That's it. Peace.
See you guys. Hi, my name is Jing Jamlang, and I am living the mic life.
We hope you liked today's episode. You can follow Jing on Twitter and Instagram. You can also follow the show that he co-hosts, Across the Line. It's found on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can also search Across the Line on Facebook and Instagram. Please like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. See you on the next one.